The show is over. The show is over. The show is over.
Hello everyone. Hey, it's good to see a lot of faces I recognize and many I don't. That's fantastic. So, on behalf of the graduate faculty, your graduate faculty student senate, thanks for coming. I'm holding the mic and talking into it because tonight is being recorded, so you have to do this for it to be recorded, for your voice to be recorded, and we want all the questions put on there because it's impossible to find a time when everybody can show up. So, oh, now I'm here. Okay. No. So it's impossible to find a time when everybody can show up. So that was part of the 7 to 9, and that's why we're recording it. And it's being videoed as well, so that everyone can get this. So format, Simone and Andrew will have the mic. So Andrew, raise your hand. So they'll have the mic. So when we go to the Q&A, it'll be a loose format. Make sure to have the mic, and that way you have the floor. And respecting everybody's contribution, let's let the person with the microphone speak. And to respect the possibility of everybody having an opportunity to speak, let's try to keep the questions to perhaps around 3 minutes, and we'll see how that goes. These are just general guidelines. So, and of course, you know, we can work with that. And I think I thought about this, but I'm going to say it. So I think that we're at a crossroads right now. We have a new leadership, and so I think that this is a really great opportunity. Things that Obama has said, and drawing parallels to that, is that, so I think that this is, instead of blaming or whatever, we're at this current situation. So I think that this is an opportunity to establish accountability, both as students and as the administration, in terms of getting the things that we need fixed, while maintaining the things that made us want to call this place our academic home. So with that spirit, I'll first turn it over to Dean Schober. If you want to say anything.
Or, I mean, I'm the one who offered, because I met with the graduate student senate about a month ago, 2 months ago, and at the time we had a good discussion and raised a lot of issues, and I offered to come and talk to all the students. Would that be beneficial? So, sort of consider a little bit of a town hall. We're actually going to do, I'm going to do a bigger one for the entire community on May 2nd. But that'll involve everyone, but I thought it'd be good to just come and talk to you as a group. Maybe I'll repeat some of the things I sent to your Senate leaders, but there's probably some new things. And I have now been here 3 months, and actually a little more than 3 months, 3 months and 3 weeks. And not that we're counting, but I've just, I found an amazing place. I was a sociology PhD from an urban school, not that much different from the London School of Economics, and that was how I really knew the Institute, was through my experience as a sociologist. And coming here, I just seen so many things, not only in the graduate faculty, but also across the entire place, things I didn't really know about. I was just saying that every day I turn a corner and there's something new that I didn't know about at the new school, ranging from a concert to a play, to an academic event, to a social justice kind of event. So it really is a stimulating place. And I found the individuals here all very innovative and energetic and active. So I think that's a very positive thing. Frankly, looking from the outside again, I've taken this job without much information. The place did have a bit of a history the last few years, and I guess I've been really quite pleasantly reacting to the extent to which people do want to pull together, despite what I think are some pretty significant hurdles and obstacles that we have in front of us. The big issues that, as I talk to people, and I've been talking to faculty, students, and staff all over the campus. I mean, the big issues are space and finances. This is a place that grew. Really, it's a very different model when it first started. Back in 1919, it was set up by a number of Columbia faculty who were upset with what they thought was the stodgy conservative nature of Columbia University. They wanted to have no buildings, no full-time faculty, and no endowments. Those were their basic principles. Probably within about 10 or 12 years, at least the building and the full-time faculty promise or principle went by the wayside. And that actually was about the time of the creation of the University in Exile, which were, this particular division or school is a successor to. But it was a very entrepreneurial place. It was a place where programs lived on a shoestring, rose up or declined depending upon whether someone was active and continued to do it over time. And I think that sort of environment really carried on for many, many years because the institution was supported largely by adult education. The graduate faculty for years, in adult education were the two biggest things we had, and we had at times, dance programs, music programs, but they sort of came and went. It was really adult education and the graduate faculty that persisted through all that time. One of the consequences of living that way was it was a model that was very difficult. Well, not difficult, depended a lot on adult education to survive going forward. And I think that sort of provides, because the founders never believed in a big endowment or having lots of buildings, I think we've been, since that very day, space constrained as well as financially in having concerns. The university itself, began to sort of centralize. It probably started really 20 years ago. They started an undergraduate program, a liberal arts program. Parsons was acquired even further ago, and they became a very big part of the university. But I think all that history is posing some real challenges. And you all know, space is a big challenge. We just do not have the square footage that even other urban universities have. I have a slide that I'll show at the next town hall that shows our position in terms of square feet per student or per faculty member. Attempts have been made. I think good progress has been made on trying to increase that, but we're still a long ways from optimal. Adding of various space, actually we're going to add 2 floors or 3 floors in this building in the coming year to relieve some of the space concerns. We're obviously the University Center is going up in that big hole down the street, and that'll add a lot of good space, but it won't come online until 2000 to 2013. So we're aggressively looking for as much space, if we can just rent the space, as we can find. We did that with the study center at 95th Avenue to try to get a little more space there. The other real challenge is the financial challenge, which is given the growth of the university, the need for space, the acquisition of space, the building of space. We are right on the edge, and we're fiscally sound on a year-to-year basis. We're not like some universities where they're in the red and they're in real crisis. But the growth plan that was laid out by my predecessors involved increasing enrollment, as well as tuition, as well as dorm fees for the next couple of years in order to meet the university's current financial obligations. So those to me are the real big challenges. The third challenge, though, is really more programmatic and academic, which is really the reason I came here. We'll work on the other problems, but the university was really trying to get more of a focus, a central focus. It was made of a bunch of sort of a confederation of individual states for a long, long time. But we're really sort of interconnected. So there's been a lot of recently. There's been a lot of interaction between faculty at the graduate faculty as well as Lang. There's been a lot of interaction, less, but certainly more than in the past, between Parsons and the both Lang and NSSR. And I think that's, you know, one of my jobs is try to figure out strategically what direction the university as a whole should go. I think I said this to the Student Senate when I first arrived here, started coming here in the fall, and I would go to board meetings, or I'd go to other meetings of staff, and even deans, and there would not be a whole lot of discussion of quality, quality of student, quality of program. It was all about, you know, are we, you know, which is important, you know, are we financially sound, how are we doing financially, which is certainly important because you can't have quality without being in good shape financially, but there was not a lot of talk about that. And that concerned me a lot. We weren't, just for the undergraduates, for example, we were not tracking or reporting just simple things that most other universities would, such as GPAs, high school GPAs, and board test scores. Not that they're the be-all and the end-all of anything, but at least gives you, you should keep track of that. And the other thing I came in emphasizing was accountability. I mentioned that already, but accountability, we need to be accountable to our students, you. In terms of the programs that we put on and whether or not they're, or to the extent to which they are actually adding value for you or getting you to where you want to go. People come to this place with a dream of doing something. Your dreams, probably different among all of you, but they're even more different than the dreams of the students that are at Lang or at Parsons, not to mention Manus or the drama school or the jazz school. And our obligation really is to try to be sure that what we're doing for you is benefiting you as much as it possibly can, and I take that quite seriously. That's why a good strategic look at what we're doing will say, you know, where are we doing well, right? Where do we need to do better, and how can we do better in those areas? It's not, you know, it's a process that people will be involved with. The town hall will be part of that on May 2nd, looking at some of the data and information that we have about the university and some of the possible, you know, potential alternatives for restructuring the university. It's a process in which anybody who wants to be involved can be involved and contribute to that. And these things don't really work unless they're not a wide enough group. Obviously, not everybody's going to want to. It's not in their interest. Not everybody wants to do it. I certainly understand that. But to the extent students, faculty, and staff are all participating in the process, I think we'll be better off for it. It will involve, obviously, tough decisions at the end of the day. And we've already started conversations with various faculties around in terms of what's happening. I've had a conversation with the NSSR faculty about what the model is to go forward here at the NSSR. So these are big questions. These are big questions. It is a moment. I do represent new leadership. It's a moment we've got to decide what we're going to be and where we're going to go. One other thing that let me just say, and then I can turn it over to Michael or to open the floor to you, is that again, when I came in, one of the things that I read early on, and this really has to do with accountability, was that in a number of areas are just service to students and to faculty and to staff was deficient. We had processes didn't work very well. People were not responsive necessarily, and that's something that I try to set to work on right away through the service initiative and really getting our vice presidents and deans to focus on that and everybody else. I talked about it with the faculty senate. I talked about it with the university student senate. I think that's very important because if things aren't working, nothing's going to be perfect, but they can work better than they are, and people can treat each other better, I think, than maybe was happening in the past. That's very important. I changed the management structure at the top of the university some in order to achieve this, and now we're working on the initiatives to do that with customer service. Another part of that, of course, is career services, and again, each program is different in what the career path for the students is going to be, or what they would like it to be. But I think we need to put far more emphasis in on that, and we're trying to invest some efforts into improving and upgrading those services. you have, I think, a pretty good person here doing that, except that she's understaffed. Understaffed. I know she at least works hard and represents you well. And so we need to do a much better job, much better job of that. I think that's probably everything I had on my mind, at least to say to you. But I'm open to questions. Do you want to add anything, Michael?
Sure. I think it is a great moment, and it's I'm very glad to have you here and to have the conversation opening up in all sorts of useful ways. So I really appreciate that. I would say, from my view, that the last few years have given us a chance to start looking at ourselves and our practices more closely. And I think the context in which we live has been changing around us also, and that's really important, that the context of graduate education is different than it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago, and that we need to be responsive to that. I think everyone knows that we have financial constraints and that our students are not supported at the level that we aspire to, and that it has not been an easy climate in which to try to tackle that for a while, but I think we're getting to the point where we can start to look clearly at the snapshot of who we are right now, where we would like to be, and how could we get there? What would it take to get there? I think I've been asking folks in my office and around the university to help in amassing a snapshot that gets clearer about where we are and what has been, how the relationship with the undergraduate college has been shifting, how we do business, and what kind of enrollment model in the long run would we like to have. I think, if you track, we actually have a better graduate student to faculty ratio than we did 10 years ago, but it's not good. It's way too high, and particularly the PhD level, it's just too many students per faculty member, and that leads to all sorts of problems that then filter out all over the place. And not that that's the only thing that is problematic in the university, or at the NSSR, but it's one of the big ones. And the number of issues that are of concern to faculty and students and staff around that can be traced back to the fact that there's the wrong enrollment model, I think it's just a lot of them. So I've more and more been trying to focus on that and seeing what could we do about that. What could be a transition plan that gets us to a new one, which raises all sorts of questions about at a university that doesn't have a huge endowment. How do you replace revenue that moves from here to there? So that's the kind of conversation we're trying to have. In the Dean's Advisory Council meetings, I've been really pleased that the Graduate Faculty Student Senate folks have been so forthcoming and collaborative in discussion, so that's been a nice development also. Don't have answers yet, but at least I think identifying what the problems are is step one toward, and then trying to bring that conversation out both to the students through those venues, but also to faculty, to board members, and to other deans, so that enough folks all over the place recognize and agree on what the nature of the problem is to help support it as we move into help support solutions as we go forward. I would say several years ago, there was not agreement at all that there was a problem with the NSSR model. Around the university, there was an image of us at NSSR in relative privilege compared to the rest of the university as we sat around thinking high thoughts and sipping tea while everyone else was groveling and space crammed. And I've definitely been explaining how the workload here for faculty is extremely high and that students are deeply undersupported. It was a surprise to folks around the rest of the university that we don't have all fully supported graduate students. And as I've been explaining, here's the reality. Explaining here's the reality on the ground, that makes everyone wake up to recognize, yes, they have serious concerns as well, but it's not like we've been living off the fat of the land and having a final time while they've been having trouble. So, and I think that conversation has advanced a lot, and that puts us in a position to try to do something as well. But we're still amassing data and trying to understand financial structures in a way that will allow us to propose alternatives. And I think the next step, once we know if we can trust all the numbers that we have, is to then start advancing a conversation.
Yeah, I mean, one of the financial model of the university is, I said, it's a big challenge. I mean, all of our schools are heavily tuition-based, so 90% of all the revenue comes from either tuition or student housing, student-related kinds of fees. And compared to other major research universities, some are state-supported, or they're in trouble right now. And some of the privates, have fairly sizable endowments, and they also have, many have larger undergraduate programs to support. But our model here was very different when I got here. It reminded me of, I think I mentioned this in the Senate, the University of Chicago had it for years, and I understand Columbia did as well, which both of them, I mean, University of Chicago got off it probably, I'm thinking 15 or more years ago, Columbia about 10 years ago, and moved to a more traditional, I think, more effective model of not counting on large tuition flow from students in PhD-oriented programs, both masters and but people who are looking towards a PhD, as opposed to people who are doing more professional master's program. So, yeah, we can open it up. Yeah. Do you want to call him?
Yeah, so go ahead and raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question, and we'll find you.
Thanks. Well, again, thanks for being here. I just want to follow up on exactly what you just said about how to finance graduate programs. I think is the main concern here. It seems, is it the case that both Columbia, Chicago, and Nada University, what they've done is simply to put a very clear distinction between money-making master programs and PhD programs, as opposed to simply relying on undergraduate or endowment to support the PhD program. And you know, that seems to be the case. And I was discussing this at Columbia last week, and it seems like they have all these master programs like money-making. Yeah. Simply, they don't feed into the PhD program, which is a big difference than we have here. You know, this is, I think, one of the major misunderstanding that has been on forever here. That you know, we have this incredibly large MA classes coming in with the expectation that this goes into the PhD program. So this is the specific question. More broadly, I was wondering whether you think, what do you think is the route to normalization of our finances for the graduate school? Do you think that we should go more towards a more classic undergraduate funded, PhD program, or continue somehow with the model we have now, and then maybe dissociating more clearly terminal masters from a PhD program, or a mix of the two?
Well, I first of all, I'm not. You probably know more detail about how Columbia actually changed. My understanding, the University of Chicago was they had a situation where they had many more graduate students in research degrees than they did undergraduate students, and they sort of flipped that. So they really grew their undergraduate. A lot of trauma occurred, if you remember, but they grew their undergraduate program substantially. Another avenue, as you say, is to clearly delineate more professional-oriented master's degrees, and Columbia very may well do that. For us, I think it's probably a combination. It's probably a combination of a number of things. Although this is open for discussion, and I mean, these are just ideas. You can do what you say, is have a really robust terminal or professional master's program. The issue with that, of course, is that there's got to be a career path for people coming out with that master's degree. And I think in our case, clinical psych is probably the best example of that, where there is work, and it's good work for people coming out. So that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is to increase the.
MA in clinical is sort of different. PhD in clinical gives different ranges.
Yeah, that's right. Sorry.
Yeah. License eligibility is the issue.
Sorry. I'm learning. Another way is undergraduate population, as you say, and also combined with that might be trimming too of the number of positions we can actually support in the right way.
Yeah, I would say that, and among those choices, there are yet more here at the new school to be differentiated and understood which is going to make what kind of difference. So, so Parsons has a whole bunch of new MA programs that are on the books. If we were to contribute more to teaching in those, would that be a better model than starting our own MA programs here, or contributing more to Milano's MA programs? Is that a better solution? And I think in terms of undergraduate contributions, is it more Lang teaching? Is it more university-wide lecture courses? What leads to the financial trade-off that allows for the support? So that's the kind of financial modeling the Provost's office and finance people have been working on for a while. We're still getting to the details of what is true, but it's getting closer, and getting quite close actually to allowing us to start modeling out what if we went that way? How would that look? Would that actually lead to a financial picture that is more helpful for us? Because so far the modeling suggests that a few of the things that we thought might work probably won't, and actually won't be helpful, but there might be other opportunities that will. So I think it's a complicated picture,
Yeah,
exactly.
and I was-
And I would say one other piece of it is that my other suspicion is that we will have to look closely at PhD level course credits along the way as well, because right now we are quite course heavy at the PhD level compared to lots of other programs where you might have the same number of credits, but a lot of those are individual research credits or mentoring credits. And there may be good reasons that we have for doing it the way we do it, because we do get lots of people who are coming here without the usual undergraduate background, and so there might be an argument for there to be more credits than at other institutions. And I would even say there are some really fantastic benefits to some of our admission policies at MA level that people who are with non-traditional backgrounds and are come here and have a chance to develop and prove themselves in ways that other institutions don't. So I wouldn't want to lose what is great about that along the way, but we might need to think at the PhD level that there's more one-on-one mentoring, like the same credits are there and charged, but it's not courses in the same way, which would then free up faculty to be doing some other activities around the university that help bring in the revenue that helps support. So I think that as a general outline is one piece of the puzzle that we'll probably have to get to, but how that looks program by program, I don't know.
And but just one caveat to that too is the other. I don't want to lose sight of the issue of placement of jobs at the other end. So that's somewhat. It's both a related and sometimes independent problem. So I don't simply just to make whatever we do financially viable is not the be all and the end all if our students are not getting good jobs, the jobs that they sort of hope to get when they came here.
Right, and so that is also, there's a new effort to try to track where our alumni are at a level that hasn't happened before. And it's really interesting and revealing, but we're very behind compared to lots of other universities in getting clear on where exactly they are. And there's some fantastic stories of where people have ended up that are a nice surprise. And then there's other stories where people did not end up where they hoped for. And we need to really understand that and understand what we can do differently and better in the long run.
Hi, thank you for coming to answer our questions. So I have a two-part question. I'm a student in the Liberal Studies program, and I was really dismayed to find that there are only 5 courses on offer for the fall, one of which is the required first-year course, 2 of which are on 20th century art movements. That compares to 7 courses on offer in the spring when a lot of us are writing our thesis, as well as 7 courses that were offered last fall. I've spoken to the chair of my department, Jim Miller, and he's equally concerned. He said that it was due largely to the fact that a number of professors who had planned to offer courses in the fall switched their courses at the last minute to the spring. However, I also took my concerns to a representative of the Student Senate who said that this is an issue that students from across departments have been raising about the decline in course offering. So my question is really twofold. The first part is, how do we ensure that departments are offering the appropriate number of courses? Specifically, how do we make sure that this fall Liberal Studies offers at least 7 courses as per usual? And then the second question is, what recourse do students as well as department chairs have to hold professors accountable for decisions like these that adversely affect the student body?
Okay, I got your email about this, and,
Yes,
and I started trying to figure out exactly what has happened, how, and where. And first off, I think there actually are more courses in the fall than that are listed in the catalog at this point. So there are 2 additional courses that did not appear in the online listing. There's an LGBT Latino course that is not listed here, but in the past has always been cross-listed. So how that didn't happen, I don't understand. I'll have to email you afterwards with the exact name. And then there was a second one as well. So I think the actual story is that there are 7, but there was a misrepresentation in the catalog. There also turn out to be philosophy courses available that can be cross-listed and count in liberal studies. So the story is a little less dire than it might look at first, and there were some screw-ups that led to it. The other piece of it, though, that is about the nature of the course planning and where miscommunication happened along the way this time. And the liberal studies program is evolving. It has new faculty that started out in the Lang programs that were part of the liberal studies program, and as we've been learning, as we've been trying to do much more coordinated course planning, and the chairs will attest to how much we've been torturing them over the last several years in trying to think through their graduate and undergraduate teaching way more in advance than they ever wanted to, and make sure that everything's being satisfied on all sides. It's a pretty complicated process. I would say with liberal studies, this is like the first cycle in which there's been the planning that has really connected all of these people together, and there were some miscommunications along the way. There were some needs from the undergraduate sides of things that required some faculty to start switching courses around to semesters, but the right people weren't in contact along the way to make it right. So I think, so the first answer is that it's not as bad as it looks, but the second answer is that the process is one that we will get more right next time. The chairs of the departments are, have many meetings with the dean's office here and with folks from Lang at the same time to do that coordinated planning. It is a little mind-boggling for anybody who's tried to do it because of the number of constraints you're trying to satisfy at the same time. And the one thing that didn't quite work this time was after it was all planned, there were some subsequent changes and the right feedback loops didn't come to put checks and balances on that. So that's
A more general point about that is it goes back to what I was talking about in terms of this being a very decentralized place and then trying to centralize. And it's...
Or just coordinate.
It just coordinated fine. The simple thing of a course catalog, having a common course catalog, so all students, no matter what program they're in, can see it, do something that is very difficult, has been very difficult for some reason here, in part because everybody was a silo, and everybody, Lang was what they're going to do, Parsons was in NSSR, they wanted complete control of what they're going to do, and then they never started communicating. The reality is, I go back, the reality is, though, that this university, unless people coordinate and work together, is not going to be successful in the long term, because it's extremely difficult to run this kind of siloed operation. It worked well when there was a lot of adult education going around, or maybe when people didn't care about the things that we're talking about. But we have to work together because we don't have any other choice. Oh, the brave souls. There you go.
I'm curious about something you were touching on a minute ago related to Emanuele's question. And I haven't been able, so I'm new here too, like you, and I haven't been able to get a grasp on what the past has been and what the future aspirations are for research in the institution. And when I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking about the idea that it seems to me like it's a big problem in part because that's where so much funding and financial support comes from, and also as far as I was sort of schooled to think that success breeds success and money brings money. And when we think about the issue of support at an institutional level, having resources for that be a venue that we pursue is a really important thing. And so I'm curious if you could talk more about what the aspirations are for research and supporting it, and I'm sure you guys know a little more about how it's been and how there have been barriers to that in the past. So I would love some thoughts about that.
All right, great question. On the university-wide level, we haven't had a whole lot of infrastructure for supporting research. Now, Tim Marshall, I think he's here, it's our provost. He's been working hard to try to build that up, working with the finance office as well as the people in the provost's office to build that up. We want our faculty and students, when they can, to get NSF grants or to get other forms of support. That not only helps you financially, but it's also a good message in terms that people do want to support our research. It means there's a certain level of quality, at least out there, at least one measure of that, how good it is. So to me, that's a high priority to get some systems in place to do that, and then pushing people to do that, as opposed to just saying, well, okay, it's too hard to do, so we're not going to do it.
Yeah, so there's two different initiatives that the Provost Office has been working on, and I'm really pleased about both of them. One is one segment of the Provost Office working on supporting faculty and students in applying to external funding to give notice of what is available to support train people in what the best way to do that is. That couples with various local efforts that have been going on in our departments. I know the anthropology department has had a serious push and has been actually quite successful in helping a lot of students get external funding. That's been terrific. I know you are somebody who's coming in and wanting to do a lot more of that for psychology, and I think there, you know, as more local on-the-ground efforts and a culture of applying for grants gets built, that will exactly build upon itself. So that's really good. The other side of the equation is one that I've been pushing hard on, and Tim has been great in helping us get there, but it's not quite done yet, is the grants administration side. So post-grant award, what exactly happens? And we've had, well, my perspective is that, you know, many years ago we were many small mom and pop shops, and the university could get away with very little because there's only a few people in a few departments getting grants, and just having a few people in a few offices supporting that was sufficient. We now have massively increased the number of full-time faculty. We've been encouraging students to apply for grants, and then now people get them, and we don't have the structure that other universities have to process, monitor, make sure that legal agreements are done right, that financial stuff happens right, that contracts work out right. It's, you know, there's just more effort that needs to be put into that. And so I think we've now assembled the right people in the room from the various parts of the university that need to coordinate on that. And I don't know, Tim, if you have any further announcements about where exactly what will live in order to make it work right. But it's clear that it has to connect with local dean's offices, shouldn't live in local dean's offices exactly, and that you know, there need to be a few bodies on board who have real expertise in this and who can help support and get it right. So, I mean, last summer was, I think, when, I mean, it was sort of a perfect storm of one departure from one office, and then somebody from a different office who had died and wasn't replaced, and they were sort of like the two people on campus who knew the most all disappeared at the same time, and then a whole bunch of things started blowing up, and it was apparent how far off we were from appropriate support. So, pushing on it.
I come from a university that was fined $5 million by the federal government for not having adequate grant reporting. And that's going on quite a bit.
That's scary.
Right.
I mean, we're leaving up to faculty to do their own reports.
Yeah, that's a real risk.
Yeah.
I think I speak probably, I'm probably speaking to the general spirit of the room here, insofar as to say, what sort of concrete steps will you take to guarantee not just simply external funding, what about internal funding? I mean, I'm sure everybody in this room probably works in multiple jobs, while our colleagues at NYU and Columbia, also going through, you know, tuition hikes, you know, simply don't have to do that. You know, they'll TA in class or whatnot. So I would like to have more concrete action from the administration to really see to start to acquire internal funding. I just find it outrageous that a school of this wealth cannot possibly procure, in real terms, those funds that are very necessary.
Well, you know, the school's not of that wealth. I mean, that's the start. But so we're working as hard as we're working on, because this is the whole point of doing the analysis that Michael talked about. We have to figure out what the financial model is, because we don't have the ability to do what NYU and Columbia are doing right now. We just don't have that ability. We're completely tuition based, just about, which they are not. And you can only, tuition can only go, it's gone high enough, and it's gone very high. So there's only so much you can do. So we're trying to figure out what the right model is to, if we're going to have a good PhD program, I agree, we have to support the students. But
And so I don't know if I was clear enough before, that's what the talk about a different enrollment model here is about. We need a smaller number of better funded students. The trouble is the current number of students and the kind of resources we have, it's just not possible to fund in the right way. And so that's where all those analyses of where the financial transfers around the university can work that make that possible are, what kind of model will it be in the long run, and then how do we transition from where we are to that over what period? That's exactly the exercise. But I mean, I'm fully on board with you saying this is not what we would like to be doing.
We only have a few minutes left until 8 o'clock. If there's anybody who has a class they need to get to, we'll try to
we're here longer if you want.
Well, you guys are, but some students have classes.
Oh, okay, sorry.
If not, then.
So my question is following up on internal funding, financial models. So my impression is the possibility of funding the PhD students via masters, more professional masters programs in the same divisions, which is pretty much what's going on right now, gives a wrong incentive, which is,
What is going on right now?
I mean, admitting a lot of master students so that, and charging tuition for those who are not funded, which then converts into a few, at least some
Actually, it's
funding.
really mostly Parsons students who are funding. I mean, we have no program here that actually is really.
Has a surplus. Yeah, okay.
So you know.
But still, we have some kind of incentive, which is to admit every single student who applies to the master's program, right? I mean, we have very big, large master's programs and a smaller PhD program. And I mean, what I see as a problem for that is that, I mean, we have as he said, a tradition of master's students actually willing to upgrade to the PhD, which eliminates this distinction and makes the classrooms for PhD courses or master's courses very heterogeneous, and somehow the level of it is lowered, not by the students who want to do the PhD and are serious about it, but by the students who were admitted and end up taking these classes, but are actually more interested in some professional, non-academic career. And so in a way that choosing the model of funding, having these large master's programs is decreasing the level of the PhD and of research. So I mean, we have to choose something that is also adequate to the quality. That's just
Absolutely.
and
Absolutely.
undergrads may seem more viable for that, having us teaching in the undergrads and so on.
Absolutely. So, in emphasizing that we need a financial model that's right, I don't mean to suggest that at the
It's
core of
just all
that is
getting the
academic
money.
values of what are we trying to achieve here, right? And making sure that we have the best programs we can possibly have. And I think what's been interesting when I've talked about this with faculty is that there are, I don't know, there's some set of faculty who have come from a certain kind of institution who say, what we really want is to go to admitting, 6 students per year, like, that are fully funded and, be done with it and not have anything more than that. You hear other faculty saying, other members of the faculty saying, but there's something really special about the atmosphere here, that if we suddenly went to that model and got only 22-year-olds who came from very traditional places, we will have lost something very important about what makes this place vibrant and exciting. So I think that's the really important thing to keep in mind as we model all of this out. I mean, it may be that we would never even have the possibility of getting 2 to 6 students per class kind of model anyway, so it's not going to be an issue. But I do think there's a set of values that we need to be really clear about what makes this place special and vibrant. And I do think there's something about getting non-traditional students, people who come from a wide range of backgrounds, into the mix that makes it a really exciting place and part of the special vibe that is the new school. So, I think we need to model out a range of financial possibilities, then we need to marry that with what our aspirations are for what kind of atmosphere we want to have here and what kind of training. And that might, that will help constrain which models make sense for us.
Yeah, I'd hate to give up the advantage to have, be able to select less traditional students to come in,
Of course,
But
but that
on the other
doesn't
hand-
mean admitting everyone
Right.
possible to get the money.
I mean, then it
That
creates a
means
real
just-
competition.
Right, no, but it actually is a really interesting question, and I've been asking folks in admissions to do, if they could do much more careful modeling of what is it about when we attract a range of students with a range of backgrounds, which ones turn out to actually, really flourish and do great in the PhD. I can say students working with me over time, it is not that there were students with really unusual backgrounds whose prior records did not necessarily give clear indicators that they would be a fantastic PhD student, who turned into fantastic PhD students, and then some people with really, outstanding backgrounds that looked like that it just did not work in the PhD program at all. So I think as we think about models and changing, we have to really think about admissions and how we make selections and what kind of bets you place. And I know in very, very small programs, faculty are regularly worried that you have tons of applicants, you fund a very small number of them, and there will be a certain percentage that it's not a good fit and it doesn't work at the end of the day. And here, because we've had a larger pool, that has actually, allowed some people to come forward that wouldn't otherwise. And I just, so there's just going to be complicated questions about what the right way to proceed is. And again, I want to make sure that we emphasize our values and what we're trying to achieve again and again and again throughout, and then figure out what financially can support it.
I really appreciate the fact that you guys are taking the time to do the kind of financial modeling that's really important to not digging us in deeper. But from a student's perspective, with a shorter timeline than people in administration and professors, I'm wondering kind of what you're seeing as an ideal timeline for starting to take action.
We may have different answers. I don't know.
I'm curious about yours.
I mean, I would hope within a year or 10 months that we would have a good sense of what, may not all the details, or may still want to test it, but at least be leaning some way. But that doesn't help the students. I understand it doesn't help the students graduate this year, or even next year. So it's a difficult. That's a difficult, if almost inevitable problem.
Right. Yeah, I guess we're pushing hard to try to get there. It's the bits of financial models. I mean, I naively thought not so long ago that that putting together a model surely couldn't be that complicated, and it turns out that getting something that harmonizes across the university is, who knew how many layers of complexity there could be in how people define what a student is, what a faculty member is, what a credit hour is, across the different divisions of the university. So even harmonizing to get to common definitions that allow common currency is, I would never have dreamed it could be that complicated. And there's been a huge number of people working for a long time on the numbers, then seeing do those connect with other realities that we understand. And so it's a much bigger task than I would have expected.
And just kind of a follow-up on that, I wonder, well, actually this isn't really a fair follow-up question, but it really has to do with harmonizing the university in terms of getting people on board once that vision is established.
Yeah.
Kind of do you have a sense for what your model for leadership is going to be around getting people really consolidated around a particular vision and create it?
Well, my model, for better or for worse, is to provide a lot of information to people, make people aware, like in this situation. We've had a pretty frank discussion. I never had this when I was in graduate school or college or anything, but having a frank discussion on what the issues are, getting people a lot of information so we all know what we're facing, and then getting iterative feedback with smaller groups from different places. At some point, the leadership of the university is going to have to make some decisions. But I always find, I think it's a psychological principle at least, that if people at least procedural justice, people understand or at least involved, even if the result is not exactly what they would have wanted, they're much more willing to accept it and go along with it than what is often common in organizations like this, where you just come out of heaven, down from wherever, outside that, wherever it comes from. I think it's chaotic to think that we could reach a conclusion that every last person, or even a gigantic majority of people, agree with 100%. So that's not going to. I don't have any sort of hope that would happen. But I do think that you can get to a point where people who care about the university, who truly care about the university, will understand and be able to go forward with that.
Yeah, and I'd say one huge piece of it along the way for me is making sure that people are interpreting what the problem is in the same way in the first place, because that is one of the things I've seen at the university over time, is that from different divisional perspectives, everybody has quite legitimate concerns that are not seeing the other side of things at the same time. So that's part of my job, is to try to make that as clear as possible.
So it's a transparency model, basically,
Exactly.
which is very different, it feels to me, than what we have now.
I mean, the hardest part of my job is being sure that I do keep all the different constituents up to some level. I have a big flow chart of all these different.
Just a quick note, to give everybody a chance to speak, if we could not ask follow-up questions and let another student ask one if they would like to pursue the issue. Marianne. Oh, Marianne, sorry.
And then Harley.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
So I also wanted to thank you for having this forum. And I want to talk about tuition increases. Because it seems to me, and I emailed you both about this also, I didn't hear it. It seems to me that, you know, there's this sort of 5% roughly, sometimes more, sometimes less, tuition increase that happens every year that I've been here. And that there's not really any discussion about it. And I feel like the reason why it's important for there to be a discussion about it is because, as we've been pointing out, you know, our graduate students are not fully funded, even our PhD students are not fully funded. So it's a different kind of issue, you know, than it is at another graduate institution. I mean, as payers of tuition, this is an issue, and I wanted to just sort of press pause on this, you know, sort of ongoing slate of increases and have a discussion about that. And you know, I understand that we have costs and that we are expanding and that, you know, thereby those costs are rising. But I think it's really important to have that discussion as the payers of that tuition.
Fair enough, fair enough. I mean, every student, I mean, the NSSR students are unusual from comparison to other students in graduate research programs around the country, or the good ones, you know, the top part of it at least, in that they don't normally care as much about it because tuition is remitted, but every other student we have here in all the other programs is equally affected by it. I think looking at tuition alone, though, in the abstract, doesn't really get you very far, okay? Because I came into this job on January 1st. You know, I mean, I knew a little bit. I learned over the fall as I came and visited a little bit more about the finances. But I came into the job with we issued a very large bond in November to build the new student center and also make changes in this building. Make changes and add on some more floors in this building. And the way it was modeled, at least in terms of being able to repay the investors who bought the bonds, was with a level of tuition increases, a level of increases in the dormitory charges, and of great concern to me was an increase, a sizable increase in enrollments across the university. The plan didn't say which programs they go in, but those are all three parts of the financial model that they were using in order to do this. I frankly came in and said that I don't know enough right now to fiddle with any of those items. I think right now what Tim and I and the deans are very concerned about doing is identifying, if we can begin to identify some other programs, some places where we can actually put students. This university has been packing students, not only into the MA programs here, but into the Parsons programs in particular, and they are very space constrained there. And that, as well as, you know, Lang and all the other things. And it was almost across the board, just getting people in, and that's also not a viable thing for us to do long term. But until I could get a better handle on what we're doing, I didn't feel I should deviate from those projected tuition increases, along with the enrollment and the dormitory increases as well. What that means for the future, I mean, I'm listening, I'm hearing, I know, and I understand the plight of the NSSR students as well as our other students around. You know, how that works out in the future, I don't know for sure, but I certainly do know that the tuition's a big issue, as is, you know, what it costs the students to live in the dorms, or how many people are in the class, and what the teacher faculty.
I would say, I mean, even independent of that, of the bond issue and building, the costs do keep rising. I mean, in really disturbing ways. And I mean, I've seen it even in the short time that I have been dean, that, you know, what it takes to recruit new faculty is a very different game than it was even a few years ago to be competitive. So, you know, there are various kinds of expenses that go up, and we have, you know, real estate expenses in New York just for renting the space and all that are complicated. There's just a lot of expenses, and the exercise, the complicated exercise, and we've really started to try to think this through. Okay, what if we had no tuition increase, or what if we had no enrollment growth? How would we continue to pay the bills? And usually the answer is something has to give, something has to be cut back, and it's a really different exercise because nobody wants to be the one that is cut back. And or how can we deliver what we aspire to when all sorts of groupings around the university, both faculty and administrative, are very thin and on the edge of understaffed. So if we were to say, let's try for a different model, we'll have to make some really complicated choices. So that's sort of the painful reality in all of that, is that there are tough questions to be asked.
Okay, thanks for coming tonight. I think it's related to Marianne's question. So in addition to the tuition increases, which have outstripped inflation, I understand costs rise, but they seem to always be more than the rise in inflation from year to year. We've also had, in moving to this space, we've lost our library by at least 80% of volumes that are accessible without having to wait 3 days. They may or may not come. And we've also lost a room that had 150 seats of quiet study space. So the concern for quality worries me as well, that you can have the brightest students with the best and most highly expensive recruited faculty, but if we don't have a library, if we don't have space to do work, it's going to be really difficult. And I feel like those are cuts we've already experienced despite rising tuition costs. And I saw a figure recently that said we don't have any more classes now than we did 10 years ago, so it's not going to course offerings overall. So I'm just wondering what further cuts you might see as being necessary for the division, or if they're not further cuts necessary, what do you think we can expect in the future?
I can't speak to precise details of those, although I mean, one thing I will say is I know in terms of library services, that was a concern of mine coming in, because even putting aside where the books were or weren't, the library function was under resourced. We've been relying a lot on NYU for that. So at least as an initial step, I know that Tim and his office have been renegotiating the contract with NYU to give us better access to the materials there. I understand. I mean, there used to be a building down on 14th and 5th. Were you here when we were still there or not?
Yes.
Yeah, and so when you
Only a year and a half.
is that all really came down here? Wow. Okay. Boy, I got my time frame wrong. Yeah, and, when that's going to happen, you're going to see a reduction in space. I mean, there's been an attempt, and we did put the study center in over 90, but it's not the same as the 95th, but it's not the same as probably what was there before. I think I was in the building twice years ago. I don't really have a good memory of it, but yeah, you're right. I mean, those are issues. One thing we're looking not just at costs in the division. I mean, we're looking at costs university-wide. There's some ideas out there. We one just out of the box idea has been to take a lot of the back office staff who don't necessarily have to have contact with students or faculty and move them off the island to cheaper locations. That would free up more space at least, and maybe in some cases save some money if you could, terminate some leases that we had if you did enough of that. I don't know how much there is to do that, but we're trying to think across the board. I've asked the deans, all the deans and the vice presidents all to look and work together at different, scenarios for cuts you might make if we had to in the scenario that he was talking about. And if there was no tuition increase or enrollment dropped or something. But one of the reasons to do it not so much is to make specific cuts, but it's more to find out where we can consolidate things and get better service at lesser cost. So those are just a couple answers to your question. I don't know if you want to hear anything.
Yeah, well, so I think we've been well aware of the study space issue in particular, we've dedicated more hours in this room to being quiet study space, and I realize it's not perfect, but it's more than nothing, right? And the 95th Avenue, I think the weekend hours have now finally begun, so correct?
We increased the hours there.
Yeah, we increased the hours there. I understand there's remaining questions about outlets and quiet as well, so that I'd like to hear more about once it's fully operational, what the remaining issues are that we're not taking care of. The library issues, that, you know, I think the new building with the library space there will be restoring, and which I assume improving over what was in the old library space. It was clearly a transitional moment of the library. So there's no denying it.
Okay, it's my turn. I'm Hal, I'm in the politics department, so that's sort of, my question piggybacks off of the two of theirs in some ways, and that is that being in the politics department, we live on the 7th floor, we're sort of distanced away from our NSSR colleagues. I know that one of the really bright spots of the old space was that everyone was sort of there all together. And so if I could just hear from the two of you, the specifics for this building, what's planned for this building, what additional space is being added, what's going to happen to the 7th floor. There's a lot of, oh, we're going to get 8, but we're not going to get 12, we're going to get 12 and 8, we're going to have the whole building, it's going to be awesome. I mean, you know what I mean? So there's just a lot of things that are up in the air. And as someone, you know, like I say, that sort of, we're all in our own sort of microcosm downstairs, I'd like to hear more sort of concrete what the details for this building are.
Oh, well, and actually, I think psychology and history, George, even
that's
further
right,
away.
right about them.
We've acquired, as of now, 2 floors from the building, and I'm trying to remember, it's 12 and 16 part. Yeah, 16. No, there's another one, isn't there? 7. Right? No, not 7.
We're on 7.
We're on 7.
So 5 and 6 will be hours. I guess we have 5
it's
now.
6.
We gotta have 6.
Yeah, 6 we're acquiring 6, 12, and then 16, which is a smaller. 16 is a smaller space. You know, we're still trying to figure out what we're going to do with those. But my one hope from mine is to consolidate NSSR more in the graduate program more in this building. I think that's the way. Am I right, Tim? That's the way we're sort of thinking right now. And you know, bringing to the extent if we can bring psychology over and history over. It won't mean that necessarily every floor will be contiguous, because we're also need space for Parsons. We need space for GPIA and some of the graduate programs as well. But you'll at least be in we hope over time on a single footprint, a single building.
I mean, the complexity is that you know, as we've gotten more and more connected with Lyon College on 12th Street, you know, there's another logic that would say we really should be together with the Lang faculty, and there's just no room to put everybody together in any one way. So there's just a few choices. There's some choices of logics around the place. So David has argued that what makes a lot of sense is to have student services consolidated on 13th Street in 72nd, 5th, and 85th. So that for students, it's not running around all over the place to get stuff done, but to have a place where you can, that's sort of the center of the university, that then is right across from the new building. You know, that makes a lot of sense. And one line of argument has been that for this building here, as more floors come on board, that you could argue it makes sense to have a hub that is graduate focused, because graduate programs both NSSR, but also Milano, GPIA, Media Studies, and potentially Parsons graduate programs that connect. So the real question is how the dominoes work to move things around to get there, and the plans in the last few weeks have. There was one sort of generally agreed on direction that all got upended recently when there was negotiations for a particular space for Parsons on 13th Street for 30,000 square feet that was in negotiation. And in the middle of all of that, suddenly it was leased away to somebody else without our knowledge. So that has led, so there was a whole set of schemes of how one might apportion this building that came during that moment. Now that that's upended and Parsons is actually really desperate for the fall, that really immediately changes the thinking. So the University Facilities Committee has been the place that this has been most discussed, and there will be continued larger meetings over time about what the possibilities are. But a few months ago I thought, oh, the 12th floor here, there's a certain logic of how politics in particular, the 7th floor should move up there. We just can't do that anymore because Parsons has this desperate need for the fall for 12. So that's, so the reality is changing over time, and tomorrow morning's University Facilities Committee meeting will be the next place to talk about what the options are.
And if we were building, new buildings in a greenfield, then we could maximize all those sorts of considerations. The problem is it's like a chessboard. You're moving things here and there at different locations. We have somebody out now, which I really want to have happen, is scouring the neighborhood for just a floor that we can lease. I'm sort of giving up on the idea of buying a whole building because they just don't come on very often and they're extremely expensive. So we just get a few floors in different places to relieve some of the pressure. But again, that means that they won't necessarily be ideally built.
Hello, my name is Johan. I'm here in the economics department, and I'd like to come back to 2 points that I think were very important and that were raised earlier. One is the question of time horizons and how they're very different for students, even long-term PhD students, as compared to the administration. And the other one is about, as someone said, pressing pause and opening things up for discussion. Because what I'm very curious about is how much room for maneuver is there actually given the plans and the constraints that were set by your predecessor in terms of financial planning, in terms of space planning? And wouldn't this be a very good time to maybe fundamentally reconsider some of these? Because I think, from a student's perspective, I think it is very hard to accept tuition increases when you're told you're paying for a student center that you will probably never set foot in, if all goes well with your graduation.
Demonstrate it's very hard for people today to think about future generations. But no, I agree. It's a time horizon difference. Look, I have far less degrees of freedom than I would have liked coming into the job. I suppose one very radical thing would be to say, okay, let's stop construction in the university center. But the problem with that is that we're in desperate need of space, and that will only put us further behind the 8 ball to do that. But that would be that would take a lot of financial pressure off to whether it's again tuition, dorms, enrollments. So but you're right. The problem, the only thing I can say about the time horizon issue is that you, for better or for worse, will end up with a new school degree from here, and you want to see it get better over time. And you don't, the quality of the institution. It's like any educational institution you're involved in. Even if you're not there anymore and didn't get to benefit from some of the changes, you want to see it get better because that just improves your own degree in that way if it's perceived to be better down the road. That's a promise. That's what I'm trying to do. You can't spend that right now. I agree, but I think that's probably the only way I can think of looking at that problem. In dealing with it.
I just want to say first, thank you for treating us like adults. Sometimes that gets
you are adults, right?
Right. Well, with your predecessor, there was this kind of opacity, and whenever we did see him accidentally on the streets, like, oh, there he is, he exists. So hopefully, this adult dialogue is something that you see as a duty, at least annually or biannually. So thank you for that. It feels good. It feels right to have this conversation. My question is structural. Where does the board of directors play into these decision-making processes? Because I know there was a conflict of interest with your predecessor's interest with the board of directors and the student feedback. If we agree on all of these things at the level of students, at the level of faculty, at the level of deans, what challenges are posed by the role that the board of directors plays? What challenges do you see? What ways? How does that factor into this change in this decision-making process?
You mean board of trustees?
Board of trustees.
Yeah. So we have the board of governors for NSSR and the board of trustees for the university.
I don't know. I'm not familiar with or I'm not sure what you mean by conflict. But I do think that the board, like any boards at this level, has this general idea they want to see the school, they want to see the university be better. I don't think there's a lot of sort of, I'm sure there's not even a clear idea about how that actually happens at the board level. And part of my job is to help the board think through that and come up with the right strategy for the overall university. I think it's fair to say there's probably a little too much micromanaging over the last few years, but that's something the board recognizes and the leaders of the board know, and I've pressed with them that they really have to let, me, the deans, the provost, the vice presidents run the institution. So I don't really anticipate, I don't see any, I mean, they're the ones who brought me in to make changes. They didn't tell me what changes to make, but they said, you've got at least a reputation for making changes, so come in and do what you can do without any sort of preconceived notion of, you sometimes worry, maybe they're, board members have allegiance to a particular school or something, and they don't want, they're going to protect it at all measures. I don't, there may be a little bit of that. I don't see that being I'm not worried about that, frankly, as an obstacle.
Yeah, my own experience from our own board of governors, and then since our board of governors has a number of trustees on the board, is that over the time I've been dean, that there has been more and more open discussion and more interest in trying to connect with what our aspirations are. And the board has fiduciary responsibility, so if we started proposing things that were financially crazy, they will stop us, right? And that's their job, they should. But I've not, in recent times, gotten a sense that the board would not be interested in hearing a range of alternative models.
Thank you. I don't know if this is so much of a question, but just a worry I've gotten from hearing a lot of people talk about the PhD students. And I'm a PhD student, so, but I'm going to try to look towards the future generation, as you put it, and think about some of these master's students. And I'm just worried about this model of having less PhD students, that we're going to somehow create a kind of like sort of cast of MA students that are going to come in and just feel more or less like they're there just to fund the PhD students, and a sense in which it becomes the kind of toxic environment where the PhD students are getting a lot of special attention and MA students don't feel that they're actually getting the kind of attention that they need, that they're here for, and it becomes competitive in a way that's not about the quality of the work, but those sorts of concerns.
Absolutely.
I don't know how to formulate this into a question, but it's just a worry that I have.
First of all, you're very noble, since you're a PhD student already, to mention that, but I think that's exactly what the problem is. I mean, the University of Chicago, when they ran this model, it was highly competitive, and so every master's student, while there was a chance they got in, they would get into the PhD program. It was a pretty small chance, and that made for a very competitive environment at the place, which is also something negative, aside from some concept of a caste. And so I think that's a drawback to doing a model where we simply just keep the number of master's students very large, but then or even larger, then devote those resources only to the PhD students. I mean, that's a danger.
I certainly, when faculty talk about alternate models, there's real questions and skepticism about exactly what you said. That's problematic in its own way. That there are MA students who are directed towards a PhD, and maybe the right solution is to have other MA students who aren't directed towards a PhD, so there isn't a feeling of the caste system. Or alternatively, to really invest in undergraduate education instead and just shrink the size all over. The trouble is, it's all very expensive to do. Every time you say, okay, what if we shrunk this part by this much? Suddenly, it's a huge financial hole that has to be made up somewhere else, and so that's the issue.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Thanks again. I want to stress also that a couple of people so far have stressed, but thank you very much for being there. There's a big difference from the predecessor. And just following up on Mary Ann's point a while ago, how tuition increases are a different kind of issue here, since so many of us pay tuition. And it's just a suggestion then. I've worked for the school since I've started here, And the types of funding we get should at very least be linked with tuition increases, same percentage. Because work study students that started here in 2006 or whatever have definitely not seen a 20% increase in the amount of money they can get each year. It's been 4,000 to 6,000, sometimes less, every year since I've come here. So just a suggestion to you, don't ever think of raising tuition without also raising the kind of funding we have. Thank
you. I have a somewhat related question and another question as well. The first question is related to the kinds of funding students get, like TA-ships, teaching fellowships, research assistantships here at NSSR. 2 years ago, the teaching assistantship stipends and the teaching fellowship stipends were increased for the first time in 13 years. We were promised somewhat regular increases to these as well when they were increased. That hasn't happened. The research assistantships here at NSSR, nothing was done to those stipends. We were promised something would be done within 6 months of the initial increase. Nothing happened. We were promised that there was a committee discussing this issue meeting over last summer. The committee never met. So, I'd like to echo Eric's point. How can we increase tuition if we can't just increase what we're paying our graduate students for these, very essential roles that we serve in the university? Also, every department in NSSR seems to be in kind of a persistent state of crisis in terms of hiring faculty. We always need more faculty. We always need to replace faculty who are leaving, and we can't start looking until somebody actually leaves or passes away. And I don't know. It's just, what is your plan for hiring at the university moving forward? And this kind of relates to our vision for NSSR. Like, what is our vision for NSSR moving forward in terms of hiring faculty, funding students? You talked about this discussion you've had with the faculty here, and what's come out of this discussion so far? What's the type of model we're looking at? Is it more internal funding from other parts of the university, more grants, things like that? I don't think that's really been articulated to us very well.
Well, I agree. The latter question, I don't think there's an answer.
Thank you.
Yeah, on the latter question, I don't think there's an answer. I can't speak about prior commitments on pay or funding. Generally, I do think, though, that one general form of support is sufficient support, whether it's through tuition remission, through stipends, through research associate positions, or through TAs. And I agree with you in principle that those have to be, they have to be able to support the students in what they're doing. The crux comes back to the same thing, which is that, okay, to do that, so someplace we'd have to give, and we'd have to, whether it's more tuition or, more students or fewer faculty or other things. On the faculty hiring, there is a plan, and Tim Marshall may can speak a little bit more about this, but we are, certainly doing hiring, in part because of the growth in the university, just to try to stay where we are. There's always a question within each school or division as to where to allocate those resources. So I'm not familiar in NSSR what those discussions actually are, which departments or which slots they may be affecting. We're also not in the position to do what some universities have been able to do occasionally, is to borrow from the future. By having a lot of faculty, you may think somebody's going to retire in 5 years or so, and so you go out and hire a junior person to begin to fill in, even though you're paying double what you are right now. That's actually become more difficult for most universities for a couple reasons. One is the financial strains that they're under, and two is that faculty are staying longer and longer in positions. So, when somebody would have retired at the age of 65 or 60 in the past, many of those people are staying on and on. Why? Well, because they're retirement accounts are not as big as they were. Two, that that they don't have to retire. There's nothing requiring them, requiring the law protection from being forced to retire. And I think many people said, it's a pretty nice, it's also a pretty nice life. And so I think we have less flexibility in doing that kind of hiring that many universities did do.
Yeah, I would say, given resource constraints and given competition across the university for every program everywhere being sort of desperate, I would say we've been in a very reactive mode for a very, very long time. And every year there's only so many possible new hires we can possibly make. And across the departments, everybody makes their pitch and competes for it, and then that happens across the university as well. And it unfortunately puts us in the position of regularly dealing with emergencies and things that haven't yet been filled from the past. Even if we know quite clearly that in another department that is currently at this moment okay, we know pretty soon they're not going to be. But the emergency we're trying to deal with from covering last year's hole, it comes first. And so it's just this, Bill Hurst years ago talked about a hydraulic model of departments where one goes up, and then because the resources went there this year, another department goes down, so then they needed attention, and meanwhile the other one goes. So it's sort of been a treadmill. So unless there were massive infusion of new resources for lots and lots of more hires than we have capability for, it's hard to get out of that, frankly.
Well, one other thing, let me just say about the overall the financial university. One thing that coming to this university is very different from prior ones I've been at is that we don't get a lot of support, financial support from alumni, which in fact most of our support, the limited amount of gifts we get every year, most of it comes from individual trustees, which is only a group of 50 people who have been very generous over years, but their capacity for, it's not like you had 10,000 alumni giving, and we're working hard. Again, this is a time problem. We're working hard now to try to build that up, find out where our alumni are, begin to cultivate them. We had an alumni event on Saturday that I spent, I think, 4 hours at, meeting people, talking to people. But we're in the early stages of that. So that's a big difference that we have from, and that's why we're so tuition dependent. I should have said that before.
There's one piece of it. And I mean, one of the complaints at the first founding of the new school was that they did not want to be beholden to alumni dollars, which is it's a lovely sentiment, and I see all the good reasons for it, but at the end of the day, it means we have not been beholden to alumni dollars because we haven't had any.
Hi, I'm Adair. I'm actually a Lang student, but I'm in the position of hoping to be a BA, MA student, so I figure I may as well come to this because this is going to be a problem eventually.
You're welcome.
So, yeah, and I guess I'm the future. But really, I do thank you for being here. And I don't know if it's a naive question, but I'm wondering about like this new building that we're building, and thinking creatively about the funding, or about where the money that's going to that building is going. Like, there's this whole school called Parsons, and it's a design school, and I'm wondering, who are we paying to like design the building? Are there ways to like, there's a lot of structure when it comes to budgets, and I don't understand a lot of it, but I do understand that it's very rigid. But what about integrating student power? Like, there are a lot of really, really brilliant designers who are going to be worth a lot of money, basically, in the future. Why not have them like work off their tuition or do something when it comes to like getting this building up? And what about like the Starbucks that's downstairs? These little things that probably cost the school quite a bit of money. I know they're not huge and they have nothing to do with faculty, but like I see like these little things, and I'm wondering, what if instead of outsourcing, the food services here, we actually had like a food service program that was within the school, so that we didn't have to pay all this, what's going to their profits, and then we could just keep more of the money. Like, I'm just trying to think outside the box, and these are some of the ideas that are coming to mind.
I mean, those are all good thoughts. The building itself. One of the things I noticed in coming here is we didn't actually rely enough on some of the talents we had internally, like the design students in all sorts of different design faculty. Right, in all sorts of different areas at Parsons, and now we're trying to do more of that. I think it's hard though to turn over a whole, say, architecture project to somebody who's, you know, basically employee of the university, who doesn't do that on a regular basis. We do have, in terms of food service, you know, we have an outside firm that does that. We could hire a lot of people. You know, I think probably, and I haven't looked at that issue closely myself, but I'm guessing that the analysis would be that the obligations, unfortunately, you take on when you hire a lot of people to do that, the liability you take on, the various kinds of costs. We'd have to replicate kitchens, which the outside contractor has in other locations. We probably are getting a better deal than if we try to do it all ourselves. I mean, I sort of believe that what we do best, I hope, is education, and probably shouldn't be in the business of, you know, doing food service or building buildings ourselves, because it's just not what we do. That's not our real competency here.
Right. Although I really appreciate the sentiment.
Yeah.
My thought has been for a long time, we have some of the best web designers in the world
Well,
here at Parsons, and surely graduate seminars proposing new things to be done with our website would be a win-win for everyone. Yeah. The worst case scenario is that there isn't an idea that we could use, and the students will have learned a lot. You know, the best case scenario is there's a brilliant idea that we could use. So I think there is in-house stuff that it would be really good to make use of.
We're actually setting up a design studio as a course with Parsons that will work with the marketing department on precisely those sorts of things. I agree about the web tour. It's sort of crazy. We have had people at Parsons actually do this. Looking at our navigation, rather well, navigation design.
Hi, thank you both for being here. Two quick comments and then a question. The first comment is that there has to be a limit as to how much you're willing to charge people. And what I mean specifically is, when I came here, I mistakenly went into the dorm residency as a graduate student, as a 26-year-old woman. I went into the dorms, which you'll know you're sharing an open space and a kitchen with another individual that's sleeping there, and then there are two more individuals behind a door.
Probably 17 and 18.
Now the kitchen doesn't have an oven or anything. The rent per person is $1,200 for me to sleep in the same room as another person. So that, to me, when I heard you say you're going to increase the rent, again, I just think, how can you do that and sleep at night? Well, those students are not sleeping, right? Okay. So the next comment is, the dean mentioned that allowing a lot of master's students in is positive insofar as it allows for this kind of diversity. I don't know what kind of diversity that is when you keep increasing the tuition. In order to have diversity, you need to fund students who wouldn't otherwise, you know, be here because they can't afford it. So saying we'll let anybody in who applies, that's not diversity to me. Okay, then my question was, when you invited students to come meet you in the spring, I believe. It was an invite-only event.
Wouldn't have been the spring. You mean this year or last year?
55 West 13th Street on the second floor.
Probably in the fall sometime.
I don't know why it was invite-only, as per your, I think you're honest wanting for accountability and transparency. But so I went, and you said you have friends and friends with money. I'm wondering how you are going to, you know, call all your friends and get money for us. I think that's what presidents do, right? They're there to earn money for, you know, you have to pitch in too. So I'm wondering, how are you bringing money into this so that it, you know, as part of our transition out of the tuition-based situation? Thank you.
I never thought of my job as bringing money to a new school. My job is to try to maximize the resources where we can find them, whether it's among alumni or among friends or among trustees. And we're certainly looking, as I said, this place is, the people who are most generous, the outsiders most generous to this place are the trustees. We have a few foundations, but you know, bringing in the right trustees, people who do have the resources. The reality is, though, that unless you get you know, a $500 million gift, the impact, you know, of that's not a panacea. It's not a look. $1 million helps. That produces about, if you use it over time. I mean, if you put it in the endowment and it grows, it produces about you know, $40,000 to $50,000 a year of usable money, which is great.
Have you done that yet?
Have I done that yet?
Yeah.
Well,
Because I can't do it. I don't have.
No, we brought it. No, we
So
brought it.
it's part of your
Oh,
plan?
it's part of my. It's part of the job. I mean, bringing as much.
You didn't just get here.
I know, but I'm excited.
No, we brought in a number of millions of dollars. We brought in a number of millions of dollars, but we haven't brought in the $500 million or the billion,
Right.
which would, you know, which would get our endowments about right now about $230 million, which sounds like a lot of money until you compare it to. I'm saying there's some tiny colleges in New England with multi-billion dollar endowments, and you know, Stanford, for example, gets half of its operating revenue from endowments, gifts, and you know, ours is only, you know, ours is about 5% of those sources at most. So we've got a ways to go, but that's all part of the puzzle, as is grants, as is, you know, everything else, any new program, whatever we can do.
So I managed to get back in the stack.
Wow.
Now that we've, you know, like opened these conversations and had these conversations, right? I just want to make a kind of like meta comment or something that, you know, I understand that the new school is not, it's not a democratic institution. I don't think I'm saying anything controversial thereby. Technically, it's not a democratic institution. But there are eras of more or less solicitation of input, and this is an era of more solicitation of input, for which everybody in this room has pretty much said we're very grateful. But you know, we're bringing these concerns, and the concerns are sort of being met with like, well, it's a decision that has been made, or it's a decision that couldn't be made any other way. You know, our hands are tied, our costs are fixed, our costs are rising, there's an inelasticity, right? And, you know, I can't help but start to feel sort of, and I think you're being very very ingenuous when you talk about, when you talk about, you know, transparency and wanting to do what is best for this university. I fully believe that. But I'm sort of starting to feel very, like, respectfully disenfranchised, right? And I don't think, I'm not even going to put that on at either of your feet. I'm just going to say that this is one of those moments when it becomes apparent that, you know, what we want to be, you know, discussion in the sense of open discussion and open decision, we're kind of being informed that, well, actually it's not that open of a discussion. You know what I mean? Like, there are discussions and then there are discussions. And, you know, I just want to say that. I don't want that to go unnoticed in this kind of warm and fuzzy, nice, open, non-confrontational moment that we're having. There's a meta sense in which it's just kind of like, you know, we're all on the same side, and your tuition is going up by 5%, and TA ships and RA ships are not. Right. And the last time that happened, and I don't mean this to be a threat, and I didn't participate in this, but the last time that happened, students stormed the building. Right? There's a certain inelasticity on the student's end that eventually says, okay, we're tired of just being told, look, this is the way the ball bounces, you know, we're sorry guys, but like that's just not how it goes. So I just want to make that.
Well, came up with ideas of what some other way to do it, and I could rob Peter to pay Paul. Okay. At the end of the day, because NSSR is just one division, I've got to make the judgment overall, and then maybe you don't like. I mean, I could pump a lot more students into Parsons, right? And you know, that would allow us to do some other things here. At the end of the day, though, I'm responsible for the whole university, and I've got to use my best judgment after listening to everybody about what the right thing to do is for all the units in all the parts of the university. So I agree with the frustration, you know, and I understand, you know, how you could see it that way. I mean, I hope you don't see it that way, but I certainly will understand if you do. You know, that's it. I'm trying to do the best job I can do. That's all I can say.
Well, this is far less profound. So one of the things that I've been surprised by and curious about is, and part of this I think has to do with how splayed across Manhattan we all are, is how there isn't as much of a sense of community as I'd hoped for here. And I remember in your sort of opening remarks to the faculty back in the fall that you were saying you were not interested in being the head of an institution that had independent silos that were not friends. What excited you about this place was the fact that it had potential for interdisciplinary work.
Right.
And there have been so many, there are lots of conversations to have about interdisciplinary work. But I think the reality is that collaboration, interdisciplinarity, exciting conversation, anything great happens in a really informal, casual atmosphere. And I think this also, it happens at faculty-student interaction, people who wouldn't normally talk to each other, whoever it is. And so there are two institutions who I think have done nice things that would be very easy for you to do. One is Harvard does it, they have, their 17-story psychology building, William James Hall, and from 3 to 4 o'clock every day there's free coffee. And of course everybody loves free things, so everyone converges from 3 to 4 o'clock and stands around and gets caffeine highs and talks for an hour.
Just in the psych department, or?
Well, they have a 17-story psych department.
So
They're like 7 times the size of our entire institution. But I could imagine across divisions that could be a reasonable thing to do, to bring people together in a really informal, totally reliable, and relatively cheap way. Another thing was at my lovely, sweet liberal arts college. Once a week there was an event called Professor Beers, and it wouldn't work here because we wouldn't have the thing, but you would have to rent, have space where you would direct people to, where students in a group of 4 or 6 would take their professor out for a pitcher of beer. Students 4 or 6 can usually manage to scrounge up enough money for 1 pitcher of beer, and would get their professor together, and it was a great accomplishment to get your professor to go with you, and would just sit and talk and hang out, and it happened once a week, and it always happened, and it was a really great thing to just bring people together, and there's such small things, but there's no infrastructure for them. I almost never see my colleagues on 1 floor above me. I certainly don't know anyone in this building because I'm off over there. It would be nice to have some sort of communal space, and I know with the Student Center that's sort of the idea, but I would really love to see something happen to bring people together to have more conversation for the sake of intellectual life and for the sake of sort of feeding us spiritually. So that's my non-controversial, hopefully, thing that I want to contribute.
Those are great ideas. Actually, the other thing I found is I've brought groups of faculty from all over the university together, and it's quite striking how often, sometimes within the same division, but they don't know each other, or they make a connection because they have a common interest. And that's, to me, that you're right. Those are easier things. Those are things that are pretty easy to do, and we can do more. We always have we're not like a small liberal arts campus where you're running into each other all the time when you're walking around just because of our structure, but you can do things to make that more possible.
Yeah, I think it became very apparent in the move to this space that despite the various deficiencies of the old building, there were a few major advantages, and one was because of the floor plate and 2 floors and the escalator traffic, and the way things were arranged, colleagues ran into each other a lot, and a lot more, and the way your things are arranged here now doesn't afford that in the same way. So there's new social spaces waiting for elevators, but that's really not the same. And so I think, I think we've all become acutely aware of how much more you have to build something if the space doesn't afford it naturally. And so we have, in the Dean's office, we've talked about this several times, and we talked about Dean's coffees and various things like that. A few years ago, we had some serious budget cuts that made coffees not part of the picture. But I think, I think there really is something important about creating a community like that, and I'm happy to revisit that and try to figure it out again.
I'm going to take the mic for a sec. So further to what Marianne was saying and some other sentiments, if tuition is going to be increased, if that's just a given, then having a sense of where those monies are going. So how that's being funneled out. So in that way, letting us understand the necessity of such an increase, I think is, I think it's necessary.
Yes.
So in terms of accountability,
Right.
This is something that, as a student, I think we need. And further, as we mentioned, now that the 12th floor might not become available to NSSR, if it's going to Parsons, then we need to know what actual steps, not what ideological steps, are being taken to remedy the lack of space situation for NSSR. So in that way, knowing concrete things that are being moved toward, then we can continue to revisit these things in that way. Otherwise, a series of ideas, all then we can have is an exchange of a series of ideas with nothing actually being effective.
So say, the discussion about the 8th floor here, which was the connector between 7 and 9, and what exactly can go there and how that can link us up is a really important one. So that's one concrete space that is a connector, really literally a connector. I'm also, for the 12th floor, I'm hoping, there will be a physical staircase connecting, and I'm hoping there are spaces up there that we can be using in the first, so loungy areas and the like that are accessible to us as well, so that's one piece of the story. I think monitoring the usage of this room and what's working and what's not working in terms of study space is one concrete piece. And then the 95th Avenue space, understanding what's working and what's not working there is yet another piece. And you gave a draft of some stuff, but I think I'd love to see the next version of where we are with that, to see what we can do to concretely help make that work better. And then it's 2013, so 2 years, but we have a new building that has a whole bunch of additional spaces to come on. So the question is, what in the interim can we do to make things the best possible?
If I can ask a question. So, if we're going to have more students and more classrooms in the building, then are we going to somehow open up more elevators, perhaps? Because, like you mentioned, that is the social space in here, waiting for that elevator on the first floor. And you can wait, 5–10 minutes for that.
It's more community time.
Right, but if you had 20% more students to this building at any given class hour.
Okay, so my understanding is nobody is proposing putting any more classrooms in this building. Okay, so the spaces that would be here would not be classroom space that lead to increased elevator lines. This would be faculty office space, graduate student lounging space, but stuff that's not bell schedule line oriented. Is that right, Tim?
Except for the process that comes up.
But that's also, I understood that wasn't classroom space that was on a bell schedule, that was lab and studio space and social space and offices. So it's not something that goes on the bell schedule.
I mean certainly most of these offices.
Or at least I would advocate for that.
Yeah.
Because it's exactly right to the classroom thing. I don't think the elevators here are designed for more classrooms. Yeah.
If I could just ask a question about the dormitory situation. So it's strongly recommended, particularly to incoming international graduate students, that they live in the dormitories. And actually it's quite difficult to get accommodation in New York without an American Social Security number and so forth. So it's almost a sort of predatory situation that we walk into, in that we don't have that many options coming here. And if you don't have very much money, then you do end up living in the kitchen with another student, in my case an undergraduate. And there's no way to exit the contract after the first week of term without paying a full year's fees. And I live and work in the dormitories, and I know a lot of students try and leave the dormitories, particularly they try and leave for the second semester, and there's no opportunity for them to do so. So I was wondering if there's maybe a way that could be opened up so that at least you're entering into a semesterly contract rather than a year-long one.
Well, I don't really, I don't know, it's certainly possible. I just don't know the financial model that we're using for that, because if all of a sudden, okay, the university is one university, so all the sources of revenue come in, they go into, they're all usable for a whole variety of purposes. If we had 20% of our rooms not full, that would have consequences in many other places in the university. So I think the answer is more to be sure we're making a lot of improvements in the dormitory. So I think the answer is less to do that than it would be to try to improve the places. I know there's renovations going on at Loeb. I know that we're working in other buildings to try to make them better in that way. Yeah, they're expensive. They are expensive. I agree. They're expensive, and also, our goal is to try to have a landing place for first-year students, whether they're international or freshmen at Lang or Parsons. And I think we've been aiming is to have spaces for 70% of the new freshmen coming into the undergraduate program. Is that right, Linda? 70? Yeah. that's our goal, and we do expect people after that to move on. I think the question is just how quickly we move on and what impact that would have. You know, if I knew we could fill the rooms, if everybody left, if everybody just did a semester only, we could fill the rooms the next semester, we might be able to do it, but that's, I'm not sure we can.
So this is just related to that. In the spirit of transparency, can you just name what improvements you are making to these buildings? And my suggestion is going to be make the rooms livable, and then students won't need to move out. You need to put proper kitchens and proper walls into these apartments. Then they won't leave, they will stay. And then maybe don't kick them out in the middle of May, because that's also a really bad position to be putting students in. So what improvements are you making to these residence buildings?
Do you want to say, Linda's here.
Sure. Hi,
Linda Reamer.
I'm Linda Reamer. Okay, both of you, I think, were talking about William Street.
How did you know?
And there's a lot of history to William Street, which I won't bore you with, but it's one of the reasons why we're using what would be the living rooms as bedrooms, and the fact that there are no kitchens. That was a ruling that came down by the Fire Department of New York when William Street first opened. There were kitchens, so it is problematic. The good news is that when the new building opens in 2013, which will also have a dormitory on top of it, we will be saying goodbye to William Street, so I know that hasn't helped you any, but at Loeb Hall this summer, we are doing an entire renovation of the lobby and the lower levels, so that in that building, like in many of the other buildings, there will be a fitness room and an art studio and music practice rooms and a larger lounge. So those amenities will be there, study space as well. And in every other dormitory except William Street, they actually have kitchens. And
but the fee isn't different.
Excuse me?
The fee isn't different for William Street than the other apartments.
That's correct.
That's unfortunate.
That's correct.
Because one residence is livable, or the others are livable, and one is not. It's the same fee.
So we should raise the fees on the other ones and lower the fees.
Well, we used to.
One place is livable, and the other, you can't live in that situation.
We used to have many different fees, which caused other kinds of problems. But the main thing is, and I'm sorry if this didn't happen for you, that one of the things that the housing office strives to do is to move students if they're unhappy. And when we have the space, you know, and a lot of students at William Street wind up moving to some of the other dormitories uptown as soon as space is available for the reasons that you're citing. Obviously, not everybody gets to go, and even though some of those open lofts are not so desirable at William Street, the suites at William Street overall are much larger than the suites in some of the other dorms, if you've seen those. So, you know, I agree, we don't have enough dormitory space that is really conducive to graduate life. That's absolutely true.
That is the biggest
and it's a mantra of mine, but it's very expensive to build dormitories in New York City, and that's the challenge that we face, is trying to give quality of life while not putting the burden of the dormitories onto other places in the universities.
I have a really quick suggestion that might be helpful. I was in the William Street situation 6 years ago as well. And one of the things I found frustrating is that there were 4 people in the place, and 3 of us were philosophy graduate students, and 1 was a jazz trumpeter. I mean, it doesn't take a whole lot of administrative work to figure out, you know, which divisions get housed. But if you could just make an effort, maybe to group similar kinds of people together, that would be tremendous in terms of livability. So, I don't know, just one small.
Maybe one quick comment that earlier on you mentioned the standards for a research institution, and over the last 7 years that I've been in many meetings, which was been over those 4 years, but faculty and staff meetings, not actually meetings like, you know, the
to address specific issues, not curriculum issues, not students issue, in which many times I've heard from staff that this was not a research institution, which was heartbreaking for me every time, and I was trying to fight back and say, well, no, we actually are. And so I think that I like to see that you repeating that, if you believe it, again and again, so that we're on the same board, at least in our aspiration, if not in our reality.
Well, I think it's actually fair to say that there are significant parts of the university that you wouldn't put that label on necessarily. I think that's one of the things that Tim and I and the deans are working on, even in the other divisions, to have a little more research focus in them. Clearly, though, NSSR is the leading. That's how I know it. That's how I knew this place, was through NSSR, the leading, the research part of the research part of the university. I think it's very unfortunate when staff people say that. I wouldn't, I think if whatever we do with NSSR, it'll be because it's going to be a high quality research institution. So, I mean, that's my goal. I think it's unfortunate staff members said that. I don't know if they were here at NSSR or University
here says that.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, right. No.
Any more questions?
We've exhausted you, huh?
If you want to make any remarks in closing, I guess.
Well, I just want to thank everybody for coming out and spending such a long time here tonight. And you asked great questions, and you're hitting on the right issues. As somebody mentioned, I'm trying to be as transparent as I can about all the issues facing us. I don't have any magic bullets for many things, but the only way we're going to get beyond that is by working together and generating ideas, generate lots of ideas. Probably the vast majority, don't end up being effective. But unless you keep generating ideas, you miss out on the winners, the winners that actually could help. So my commitment is to keep people informed about where we are, to listen, and try to do, as I said, the best that I can, that Tim can, the deans can do, and all the other people in the leadership of the university to try to make this a better place, both for you today, but also for the people who come after you, and for you once you're an alum of this place. Thank you very much.
One thing, so we are planning to do this at least once a year, but I think ideally every semester we were hoping for. So at the next one, we can all come back and bring colleagues, and we can revisit where we left things off now, and therefore.
Will there be minutes typed up of this?
Yes, there will be minutes, and it's recorded.
Yeah.
And it's taped. So thank you again.
Thank you.